Hotel doesn't charge another $25,000 or something. Anyway, we have Dr. Tori
You got it.
Gambaporta. Anyway, who's going to be talking to us about good investigations reduce uncertainty. Offensive testing reduces wiggle room.
Well, hi. My role combines clinical healthcare expertise with laboratory oversight and toxicology education. Much of what we're going to discuss today is going to center not only on testing, but understanding the limitations, the strengths, and the context surrounding results. I'm Dr. Tori Gambacorta from Any Lab Tests Now, and today we are talking about something that every investigator deals with constantly, whether they realize it or not: evidence integrity. Because toxicology evidence is powerful until it isn't. One of the biggest misconceptions that people have regarding toxicology is believing that the lab result is automatically the truth. That's not true. A toxicology report without context is just a number with confidence issues. So bad timing, sloppy documentation, broken chains of custody, the wrong questions being asked, all of that, along with careless collection, can cause a lot of turmoil into the court system, because that completely changes how the evidence gets interpreted. It opens us up for challenges and even exclusion. Now, bear with me a little bit today, because of the conversations that I've had with many of you yesterday and today, I have decided to completely rewrite this education that I'm giving to you as sitting out there so that I can provide you with the most value. So let's get rolling. Some cases start falling apart before they ever reach the courtroom. That's where you come in. Your job as investigators is to reduce the wiggle room. This phrase is really going to be the cornerstone of the presentation today, because by reducing this wiggle room, you have to understand that people lie, people exaggerate, people suddenly become deeply committed to sobriety and self-improvement about 4 days before a hearing. Biology, that's what's harder to fake. But even strong science becomes weak if the evidence, when it processes, falls apart. So today we're talking about where toxicology evidence breaks down, how investigators can recognize weak testing, and then how to strengthen defensibility of your case by creating the context that your clients, your attorneys, and the judicial system needs. Now, Any Lab Test Now can support investigators in many ways. We have certified specimen collectors. We do chain of custody protocols and documentation. We have legal DNA collection options, drug and alcohol testing coordination, as well as locations, over 280 of them across the United States. So if testing needs to be done across state lines or with multiple parties, we can coordinate and accommodate that as well. Now, this slide is probably the simplest summary of your role as investigators. Strong investigations reduce uncertainty. The process protects your credibility. Evidence fails when procedures fail. So the opposing counsel almost always attack the process first, not the science, not the laboratory, not the methodology, the process. Because if they can create doubt around the identity, the collection, the timing, the documentation, or the chain of custody, that's what can weaken the entire case. As a result, without your context, these lab results, they're just numbers. And you are what give these numbers meaning. So drug testing is not simply just a laboratory process. It is a clinical and forensic tool with significant human and legal implications. Drug testing is impactful in areas such as the workplace safety, public safety, criminal investigation, occupational medicine, family court, pain management, compliance monitoring, healthcare management. So this is where experience of interpretation becomes essential. The result itself is only one portion of the overall picture. The lab supports the investigation. It does not replace investigative work. This is what brings us into some of the education. Now, on our table, we had a lot of different flyers, and then we can still provide to you that will break down the different matrices and the different drugs and metabolites and their windows of detection. Detection windows can vary dramatically based on a person's metabolism, frequency of use, body compensation, and the testing methodology. So say, for example, if you are looking for something to see if someone has chronic usage, you're looking at long term. When you're going for blood or urine or oral fluids, that's not an applicable test because their detection windows are much shorter. They're from hours to days. But when you look at hair, you're looking for long-term historical issues and usage, which shows weeks to months up to 90 days. Each testing modality answers a different clinical or investigative question. And that's what's very important, is to understand that you are providing the right test for the right legal question. So the next thing to consider is what you're actually testing for. These are a few examples of common metabolites that are tested, like THC, cocaine, benzodiazepine, opioids. Now, look at cocaine. When you're looking at urine, you are only going to have a testing window of 2 to 4 days. That might be exactly what you need. But if you need to know, say, for example, there was an accident or on the job incident, and you need to know if there is current impairment, that's where blood, because it shows within hours. And if it's the next day, you would go for oral fluid because that's 24 to 48 hours. Again, hair is only applicable when we're doing the long-term cases so that we can see, is this chronic use, are the metabolites coming out of their system and how they're using it. So this is where detection window education becomes vital. Again, the wrong test answers the wrong legal question. So let's break it down for the most common. So urine testing remains common because it's affordable, it's accessible, it's fast, and it's widely accepted. I know a lot of you in your different businesses, you may have a rapid cup and just do the testing and then send it in for maintenance. Now, the problem with the urine cups and the rapids is that it also creates some of the biggest courtroom fights. Urine generally demonstrates exposure, not current usage, not specific impairment at this moment. So that matter is going to change the dynamic tremendously. Yes, people do try to cheat on urine tests. Yes, it is fairly easy unless you have parameters set in place, such as availability for observed collections, identity verifications, chain of custodies, so that you know each handling process throughout it. A lot of times when people are trying to fudge these tests, they'll bring in synthetic urine or urine from somebody else, or they'll try to heat it up, or they'll do like one of those internet detox drinks that you see. Now, human creativity, it becomes pretty advanced when you have drug testing on the line and people are worried that they're going to get in trouble. So this is why the chain of custody matters. So like, remember, when a positive urine test is there, it may indicate prior exposure, but not necessarily the current impairment. So then if you're wanting to know the current impairment, we would recommend the oral fluid testing. Now, oral fluid testing continues growing in popularity for good reason. It aligns better with the recent exposure, and it's harder to cheat because you don't have to have an observer in the bathroom with the person being tested. The oral fluid, they can do it right in front of you in an open setting. So this makes it incredibly valuable for the post-incident situations, workplace investigations, and reasonable suspicion cases. Again, the observed collections are easier. There's just 2 people and you're collecting oral fluids rather than having some of the embarrassment that may occur with observed urine collections. The timing also tends to better align with current impairment. But even very good testing becomes vulnerable without the proper documentation. And this is why utilizing a lab in this setting can help you find those gaps and fill those holes, again, with your certified collectors, your identity verification, your chain of custody handling, as well as advice on making sure that you are getting the proper specimen in the proper timeframes. Oral fluid is your test of choice when current impairment is the question. So next we're going to go ahead and pop over to the hair testing. We spoke of this earlier. This is for our long-term chronic uses cases. When you're doing hair testing for your specimens, you can see usage up to 90 days within the system. This is especially valuable in custody disputes, relapse concerns, chronic use allegations, as well as long-term behavioral questions. Hair testing is able to give you the historical picture up to the 90 days, but it does not show you the impairment on the specific day, at the specific moment. If that is what you are clinically needing, that's when blood is advantageous for this. Now, the limitations with blood are that there's that short detection window of up to hours. There's also the fact that it is a little bit more invasive. You have to have a phlebotomist collect the blood, and it's also a little bit higher cost for you. Interpretation without the clinical context can lead to the inaccurate conclusions, which can totally ruin a case. Now, when you are in drug testing, you always have the risk of false positives and cross-reactivity challenges. The potential causes of some false positives would be prescription medications, over-the-counter products, cold medications, certain foods that you eat, supplements, and there are some laboratory limitations with that. That's why when you do the initial testing, it is always considered a presumptive positive. If a rapid test, oral, fluid, any of those, if they pop positive, we highly, highly recommend that you send that to confirmation testing, because when it goes to confirmation testing, it's able to break down the compound even more from the presumptive positive to say that this is definitive. It will eliminate any of the things like the ADH medications, the CBD, possibly some antidepressants, because a medical review officer will actually speak to the client, get their medical health history, put together the picture for you so that beyond a shadow of a doubt, you can tell, is this due to illicit drug use, or is this a cross-reactivity that is showing because of medication? In addition to that, we can separate out the different metabolites. THC is a very unique beast, especially because in a lot of the states it is legal, other states it is illegal. So our testing with our confirmation assays, we are able to say this is Delta 8, this is Delta 9, this is THC direct. We're able to itemize out those cannabinoids as well as look for some of these designer synthetic drugs that are now on the street. Presence does not equal impairment. This is one of the most misunderstood concepts in toxicology. The positive result may indicate exposure, but it does not automatically prove that they had that acute impairment. And this is where your investigations become absolutely critical. Your documentation creates an interpretive context so that the court systems can look at everything. Your timelines, witness observations, behavioral changes, video footage, scene conditions, medication disclosures. This is what transforms a laboratory result into a complete defensible narrative. So when we're looking, and I do apologize, I'm not sure why this misaligned, but please bear with me on that. So when we're looking at the screening versus the confirmation testing, the initial screening is performed by using immunoassay methodologies, a lot of rapid testing, and then we have the presumptive testing. So if it pops positive, again, you run cross-reactivity, you run the court system saying, oh, this is a false positive, or there's variables. So this is where we use gold standard technology and we send it out from our laboratory into other laboratories such as US Biotech, United States Drug Testing Laboratory, Omega, depending on the type of testing and what is necessary. We work with many confirmatory test facilities as well as the medical review officers to help you create this. So the most important concept in the screening versus confirmation testing is understanding that distinction between the presumptive screening and the definitive diagnosis. Specimen validity testing is very often overlooked, but it plays a major role in the forensics reliability and also in workplace testing integrity. Scientific accuracy remains critical, but the informed interpretation and the scene that you all put together is just as equally as important to the case. Without the confirmation testing and without the context that you provide, significant errors can occur, which does not do your client any justice. So there are things that happen that make your evidence unusable. Some of the common concerns are dilution, alteration. Are they using synthetic urine? Temperature irregularities and specific specimen substitutions. So on our end, on the front end, ways that we help combat that is we do a creatinine analysis. We check the specific gravity on the urine. We do specific pH testing, oxidative testing, and temperature verification, all before we even read the results. And we document all of these observations and quantitative measures on our chain of custody before the result even posts. Then all of this picture goes with the specimen to the confirmation testing. Now, the possible holes that courts do seem to scrutinize when they're looking at drug testing is they look to see, was the client identity verified properly? Was there a collection timeline documented, or is it unclear? Were there chain of custody gaps? Was the specimen left somewhere where it was not occupied or not documented or accounted for? Was the wrong test done for the wrong legal question? Are there missing forms, missing signature, missing timestamps, poor handling, poor storage? And one of my favorites are when they present home kits as legal proof. None of that is going to fly. And truly, the home kits are great for the client's individual, oh, I know I need to go get a blood test. I know I need to go get a urine test, a DNA, a drug. Let me see what I'm going to do. But for anything in a court of law, for anything in legal, don't allow them to use home kits. It will just poke holes in everything. So there are a ton of challenges that occur as more and more street drugs are being developed and more things are being heard of. Legislative changes are much slower than the people's creativity in creating new drugs. So a lot of the challenges that we encounter are the Delta 8 THC products, the synthetic cannabinoids, designer stimulants, the hemp-derived products and compounds. And that creates a lot of legislative challenges. You know, the legal availability versus the impairment, product labeling inconsistencies. You know, if you're labeling something and you're purchasing at a store and you think it's a Delta 8, yet it's popping positive as pure THC, that creates a possibility for question on whether this person was legally impaired or illegally impaired. Our testing that we do with the confirmation is we can break all of those specific components out so that that is not a question, that that person cannot use something as an excuse like, oh, I didn't know. Well, this is what we find out. We can break it down for you. So these examples demonstrate why the interpretation often requires more than simply just the lab report. Now, I met several people and we were discussing DNA. Now, DNA testing has a lot of the same vulnerabilities as toxicology testing. Not all of it is legally admissible. There's a massive difference between I'm curious and I need this for a courtroom for legal evidence. Home kits, like I said, they're fine for personal curiosity. But if we're discussing anything like custody, inheritance, probate, immigration, identity disputes, then the chain of custody, which we do with photo identification as well, it becomes absolutely critical to what's going on. So one of the smartest questions as an investigator on intake that you can ask is, are you looking for personal knowledge, or are you more interested in something that is legally court defensible evidence? That single question will prevent enormous future problems, because if it's going to court, a chain of custody is not an option. So most cases don't collapse in court because the science failed, because the testing failed. They collapse because somebody skipped a step. The most problem common that we see are identity not verified, delayed collections, chain of custody gaps, wrong test, missing signatures, incomplete timestamps, and poor specimen handling. And then, like I said before, my personal favorite is the home kits that get entered in as legal. Please don't do that to yourselves. The courtroom requires integrity. And if you do something like that, you open yourself up and the rest of the case to look sloppy, and then your credibility begins to be questioned. Context is always essential with toxicology interpretation. The wrong test answers the wrong question. This is where things become very, very real. Opposing counsel starts asking, who collected it? Where was it collected? How was it verified? Were the seals intact? Was documentation? Were there time delays? Process equals admissibility. One missing signature becomes a focus point. So instead of the courtroom looking at actually what the result says, they start focusing on the process. What else went wrong? What else is missing? So they are basically taking the integrity of the possibility of the test instead of the actual results of the test, which is most important. So delayed collections also create a major vulnerability. If an incident happens on Monday and the collection is not done until Wednesday, you run into questions that can happen. Did the person start doing detox drinks? Was there dilution arguments? Medication? Can it have been contaminated? So the longer that you wait from the time of incidence of when your testing is needed, it opens up a can of worms that can be avoided. This is why your documentation and your investigation matters so much. When you guys do your portion of what you have to do thoroughly, my portion is so much easier, and everything that I can do on my end to support you will only help you. So I've created a question checklist that when you are trying to figure out what type of testing or how you can best serve your clients, when you run it through this, it can save you a lot of headaches. So before testing, what you want to look at is, what is the actual legal question that's being asked? That leads you to, are we using the right specimen? Was the collection time documented? Was the identity verified properly? Was collection observed when appropriate? Was the chain of custody maintained? And were there any red flags documented? Say, for example, if somebody walks in and they smell of marijuana, I am legally required to put that in my note sections in my chain of custody. If somebody walks in and they are acting a little bit shady, or they look like they have something in their pockets, I am legally required upon any suspicion to retest them. If any of our testing comes back with a different specific gravity or a different temperature, anything to indicate that there's adulteration, we immediately document that, start a brand new chain of custody where the person is then observed. Empty your pockets, spin around, and you do it with someone's presence. We want to avoid all possibilities of adulteration or faking a test. Okay, so this is where I need a little bit of audience participation for a second. Have any of you been in a situation where you know that you have great evidence, but yet in the courtroom, it's one small procedure step and it just kind of went out? Tiny processes they can cause massive legal vulnerabilities. And it's not even your fault. It's a failure on someone else's end that just didn't get picked up. So quickly, I'm going to go through a couple scenarios to kind of let you know how this is applicable. So in this case example, there's a 42-year-old person who undergoes a routine workplace screening. Now, they pop positive for amphetamines. Now, the possible concerns for the employer during this rapid test would be, did they use drugs on the job? Was it illicit? Did they then violate a workplace policy? And then that would lead to administrative consequences that need to be done. Now, when we took this and we did further investigation, sent for confirmatory testing, we found that this person was on prescription ADHD medication. This caused a cross-reactivity, a false positive. So by using our confirmation testing, we were able to prove that this person is negative for illicit substances, virtually saving their job. So screening tests, again, they're presumptive, and they must always be interpreted alongside the medical history and the personal context. Another scenario with THC. So a person who was a chronic user stopped. They got their employment. However, they report several weeks of abstinence. Now, when they pop positive on a drug test. So what we need to figure out is, are we assuming that they're doing the chronic usage still? So are they following with their compliance when they were ordered not to do it, or are they violating that? Now, the reality of this situation is the THC metabolites are very, very difficult to cross out or to pull out on a rapid screening. Things such as chronic use, metabolism, body fat composition, the hydration status, the timing of the testing. There are so many other variables that the THC usage shows into a specific person. Now, we have to take the investigation considerations. Does detection equal their impairment? Does the detection equal their exact time of using? No, it doesn't. So the THC interpretation remains one of the most misunderstood testing in toxicology because of the legalities across state borders. And this is where we would go towards more of a hair test, and we would pull out the metabolites to make sure that it is continually decreasing, so that it's not current use, that we're showing that it was chronic use, and that that person has followed their compliance and is no longer taking. Now, another common thing is a diluted specimen. So when a negative result comes in, it's not always reliable as well. It could be positive due to the tampering. And dilution is a very easy one that people have found that they can do. So that is also why, as on our end, we look at the specific gravity, the temperature, the pH, as well as the creatinine, because we need to see, was the specimen diluted? So in this case, a gentleman had come in, diluted the specimen, and initially the positive test was there, so we had to rerun it, and we did it under observed. We found that it was diluted. So that is all that goes to the confirmation, and we send everything along with our documentation of the first test being shown as diluted, the second test there. From there, the legalities, the workplace, the court systems, they do what they will with the results. My role is not to make judgment. Your role is not to make judgment. Our roles together are to provide a case scenario so that whatever needs to be done with these individual clients can be done appropriately for them. Now, drug testing should never be interpreted from the isolation of a broader clinical picture. This is one of the most practical concepts that I hope that I've implored to you all today. The wrong test answers the wrong questions. So you guys do not need to be laboratory scientists. You don't even need to learn how to interpret the results if you don't want to. But what you do need is to understand how avoiding creating the ambiguity, the expensiveness of testing can be if you are not doing the proper ones at the proper time and creating that context. So before you order a test or you're recommending a test, make sure that you are asking, are we looking for long-term behavior or recent use? Do we need to do historical patterns or current impairment? Do we need to verify? Because urine, hair, oral fluid, and blood are all easy mediums and matrices for you to use, but they all create a different picture. They all offer different answers. Behind every laboratory result is that individual laboratory picture. So at the end of the day, good investigations reduce uncertainty. That's really what this entire conversation has come to. Science matters, but your documentation matters even more. Because even if perfect science is there, we become vulnerable when the process fails. So investigators are not just gathering the information, you are protecting the credibility, you are strengthening the defensibility, and you are reducing the wiggle room. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope I've been able to provide you some value. And remember, trust but verify, and hopefully with a chain of custody. And I can definitely, I don't know what my timing is because I know you guys have it 1, so I can take questions if there's time. If not, I will stay afterwards and answer anything privately.
You made mention of some processes regarding amino acids and later creatine. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So if we can go back to this slide.
And why is that germane to a test? It shows like liver function, am I correct?
Well, it also shows dilution. So if somebody is diluting their specimen or they're overhydrating, like say, for example, I'm going in for a urine test. Yes. And I pound 6 Vosses before I go in. And because let's say I did illicit substances the night before, and I'm hoping to be able to urinate it out. The creatinine level will lower as well as the specific gravity of the urine to show that over dilution. So in a scenario like that,
It means they ate too much before the test?
no. So the elevated creatinine is not necessarily an issue with the toxicology person. You're going more into a clinical laboratory result for the proteins. But it is just like a really unique factor that we can use being a laboratory as another tool to say, did you alter this sample or did you not alter this sample?
And the amino acid part, I was really keen on that.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that relevant? Same again.
Absolutely. And then also with the blood testing, when they're pulling out different metabolites, they can use the different proteins to see how things are interacting with one another. So we're ruling in, whether it's a delta 8, delta 9, THC, different metabolites.
Chemical processes in the body.
Yes, sir. Excellent. Oh, thank you. I appreciate your time.